All right, let's go ahead and get going.
Sounds good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you and happy spring. So if you haven't joined our meeting before, I think everyone has, but just in case, I'm Ryan Knowles. I oversee the BRT program here at Colorado Department of Transportation, Region 1, covering the Denver Metro. And I am overseeing the Federal Boulevard BRT project along with our project team. So we'll jump right in. We have a pretty good update today in regard to where we are with the project. So I'm going to give a high level project overview and then or update rather, and then we'll get into some specifics about public engagement, our 30% design, and then our environmental review analysis. But we should have a lot of time for questions and discussion at the end of the meeting. I don't anticipate that we'll need our entire hour and a half today, but um, certainly if folks have things they'd like to discuss, then we have that time available. So with that, I did want to discuss the project. There was a communication that went out, I believe it was the week of the 12th or 11th, in regard to the status of the project in regard to funding. And so the intent of that communication was to uh, reaffirm our commitment to the BRT project, just given the news that it's been out recently regarding federal funding. So as you may recall, we did submit a rating application to the Federal Transit Administration for a small starts grant last summer. We are still waiting to hear on a funding recommendation for that application. So the intent of the communication was really to say that, we're committed to this project, regardless of what we may hear with that recommendation. We are moving forward with the project. It's not canceled, it's not postponed. I know that there has been some discussion of that in the community, so I just wanted to take a moment to say clearly that we are continuing the project, and I will leave it at that. Okay, so public and stakeholder engagement. So we have been continuing our outreach to the community. We have been visiting a number of the registered neighborhood organizations in the corridor. I think we've visited most of them at this point. So now we are looking at doing follow-up discussions and presentations. But you can see our upcoming outreach that's already scheduled on the screen before you. So as the spring has started and we get into summer, we anticipate being at more community events, particularly the ones that are outside. Um, so I think we had a lot of really great engagement last year on that, and looking forward to being out in the community more, talking about the project. Uh, to date, we are by the end of February, I should say. We've had 81 public events. So those include the festivals and community events, as well as the RNO meetings, pop-ups that we've done, libraries, recreation centers, etc., as well as the 3 open houses we had in May. And we do anticipate having more open houses likely this summer. And so we'll have more information on that as it becomes available. I did want to revisit some of the uh, feedback that we have received. So generally speaking, we have heard a lot of support for side running bus rapid transit on Federal Boulevard and the service plan that we've shared with the community. So the two 15-minute patterns overlapping between Westminster Station and Evans Avenue. Um, we do hear pretty frequently that the bus isn't very reliable today, and that uh, folks really do want faster, more reliable service, a more frequent service. And so We do think that the service plan addresses that desire. And so we feel good about what we've developed in partnership with RTD. We do also continue to hear the desire for a dedicated bus lane for the entire project. And so, as we've discussed in this group, we are adding bus lanes to the corridor for as much of the corridor as we can. And then where we are constrained and have issues with right of way as well as with traffic volumes, we have taken a targeted approach to the implementation of bus bypass lanes to address the delay that the bus would experience in the corridor in those sections. We also continue to hear safety concerns regarding vulnerable users, so pedestrians and cyclists. And we are addressing those safety concerns through our design process. So as we move forward with the design, we'll certainly be refining those project components, and we'll be presenting those likely beginning to midsummer. So we'll really dig in kind of at a block by block level. We've also heard a lot about security at stations, so personal security. In our station design effort, we are really looking at improving that situation with ensuring that there are clean sight lines for folks who are waiting for the bus, as well as having security infrastructure like cameras, as well as emergency call boxes, and good lighting is a big piece of that. So as we further develop the stations, we'll be sharing what that looks like with you at a later date. And then finally, we've received a lot of comments regarding amenities, accessibility at stations, as well as making sure stations connect different routes. And so we've really taken a look at our locations and made sure that we are addressing those connections to other bus lines, particularly going east and west, as well as the rail lines, ensuring that we are making connections to bike infrastructure, and ensuring as well that the station platforms themselves are accessible to anyone who wants to get on the BRT. Morgan, did I miss anything?
Nope, I think you covered it. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. Okay, so as you know, we are in the process of developing our 30% level of design. So this is often referred to as preliminary engineering. And so really the intent here is to develop the base design, the base of the construction plan for the entire project. And then in the next phase of the project is really when you start to get into the finer detail as you advance towards construction. So in regard to updates, I think Holly, did you want to cover this? Or would you like me to?
Sure, either way, I can just add some stuff along the way if you want to go through it or.
Sure, I'll go through it and feel free to jump in.
Okay.
So we have been coordinating with staff at all of our partner agencies. So we've been working very closely with Dottie's staff, as well as staff at Westminster, Federal Heights, Adams County, RTD, and DRCOG. So we've gotten a lot of really great feedback from that staff and have been working closely with them on feels like a weekly basis at this point. So
Yeah.
really, yeah, just a lot of great comments, a lot of discussion about very technical details like turning radii and truck movements and bus movements, particularly for buses. Turning on the side streets is a discussion we had this morning. Tapers, etc. So a lot of really detailed design going on at the moment. Those discussions have focused a lot on safety enhancements, particularly curb extensions, bike lane treatments, particularly for bike lanes that are approaching federal on side streets, as well as access management. So the where driveways are and how we can clean those up on a case-by-case basis. So, we're looking kind of at the property level with the driveways and making sure that, we're not impacting anyone's business operations, but that we're also, really trying to improve safety for the curbside running BRT. We have been working in close coordination with staff on crosswalk and curb ramp design. So you'll see when we share designs later that many of the curb ramps and crosswalks are getting realigned to either shorten the crossing distance or make it easier for pedestrians. So that's an important thing that we've been focused on. We have looked a little bit at lane reductions on the side streets, and we've been coordinating with Dottie on that, particularly in Denver. So more to come on that, but that is something that we have looked at as well. And then we have also looked at areas on Federal Boulevard that include 2 left turn lanes, generally speaking, going on to higher volume streets like Alameda or Evans, for example. So we have been looking at if double lefts are needed in all cases, and we're still working through that analysis, but I think you may see some reductions. Some will have to remain, however, just based on existing turning movement volumes. We don't want vehicles to queue up to the extent that they back up traffic, then causing disruption to the BRT service. So that's a significant thing we've been looking at. Station footprints. So we have been looking at the station locations and determining the amount of space we'll need for each station, given the available right-of-way or property constraints that may or may not exist. So you can see on the in the picture, the rendering, this is at 26th and Federal. So this is a location where we're actually able to extend the curb extension that was recently installed, and we will have our preferred station footprint in this part of the corridor. Some other places, though, where the property line is very close to the back of sidewalk, existing sidewalk, which in many cases is not the preferred sidewalk length or width, rather, we'll have to work with that more constrained area. And so you'll likely see some stations where the station platform and the sidewalk are combined. But in most cases, we have tried to have the sidewalk go behind the station platform.
Hey, Ryan, really quick, it looks like we have a hand raised. We can save that question for the end.
Let me finish the slide and then I'll.
Perfect.
I see it's Alejandra, so I'm sure she has a good question.
Great.
For storm sewer and inlets, drainage in general, we've been working through that with the Denver team as well as our local partners in the north. So just making sure that we can work in the appropriate flows for high water events, significant rainstorms. Also thinking about green infrastructure, particularly south of Alameda, where we've incorporated that project from the previous one. And then finally, thinking about the traffic signal design. So as a reminder, we're going to be rebuilding many of the traffic signals that are on the corridor. So some of that work had been planned and we absorbed it. We're also going to be addressing some of the signals that are just in really poor condition. So we're working on that. Alejandra.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Before I forget, I wanted to just clarify for us, please, the lane reductions on side streets. What do you mean by that?
So we've been looking at on some of the intersecting streets, if all of the lanes are needed. I think one of the ones that has come up as Alameda. Or is that Alameda? Holly, am I saying that right? I think it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is one. Yeah.
Yeah. So the like if you're going east on Alameda from Federal, there's 3 lanes, but then I think like it's after 500 or 1,000 feet, the third lane just drops and then there's 2 lanes. So we've been looking at, is there a way to potentially address that? So things like that, just making sure that we can make the operations uh, a little better so that the crossing distances in some cases may be shorter. Um, we'll have more detail on that going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Polly, did I miss anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that was great, unless anybody has questions or any other detail there. Lots of good work, I would say, in the design front, and lots of great collaboration with those local agencies to make sure that we're implementing as many safety features along the corridor as we can when we're out there making modifications, so.
Okay, well, on to our environmental update. So we've been doing a lot of work on our environmental analysis that's required by NEPA. And so we've been working very closely with the FTA as well as CDOT environmental planners and our local partners on that work. So on the first bullet point, so we've been doing a pretty significant review of historic impacts. So that was one of the areas that required a good deal of attention for the East Colfax BRT, and so we wanted to start that work early because we didn't know how much detail and how much time it could take. But we have been moving forward on it and making good progress. We have internally been reviewing our initial survey of historic properties and potential impacts. Our next step is to have the Federal Transit Administration review that because they're ultimately the agency that needs um, to sign off on the environmental analysis. So we'll have an update on that hopefully in the summertime. Holly, do you have anything you want to add there?
No, I think that's good. Just
Okay.
trying to really be mindful and understand where those properties are and make sure that we're trying not to have negative impacts to them.
Yes. So we have also been doing a pretty thorough air quality analysis. We did have to go back and do some modifications to our initial work based on the executive orders that were issued by the new federal administration. And we had to also separate out our state required air quality analysis from the federal one, just because there's a little difference now in the nomenclature of those reports. So, but we've made good progress on that. And I think we are still in the draft stage at that point. Is that right, Ollie?
Yes.
Yes. So there's some more review to be done on that. We did submit a final noise report to the FTA, which they are conducting a legal review on now. So generally speaking, BRT projects don't have significant noise impacts from a transit perspective. And what I mean by that is, when you think about a BRT project from a transit perspective, they're generally comparing that to like a rail project, which has pretty significant noise impacts. Not to say that there won't be any noise with a BRT, but we don't expect it to be much more significant than regular noise from the roadway. Jill.
I'm actually really interested in the noise impacts because I
Mhm.
think that's going to be one of the significant benefits is that it'll be significantly quieter in the sections where we have a dedicated bus lane and fewer general purpose vehicular travel lanes. So I'm wondering if you're doing that analysis at all.
Holly, can you speak to that? I don't know if we do we go into as much detail as reviewing decreases in noise, or are we only looking for increases?
This, and if it's segment by segment, I'll have to get back to you on that, Jill.
Mhm.
I don't know if it has it where we can pull that out, but let me take a look.
I think that would be really beneficial information to have. I think that's an
Mhm.
underappreciated benefit of road diets that I've already seen on streets like York and Josephine, where they implemented the road diet recently. It's significantly quieter where it's along City Park. I'm noticing it with the Colfax BRT, even during construction, because they've reduced the number of lanes. It's much quieter and more pleasant to walk along Colfax as a pedestrian right now. And I just think it would be a really helpful talking point, especially when we're talking about where are we dedicating lanes and what are the pros and cons of dedicated lanes. I think this is a significant benefit that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, I can take a look at that. Thank you.
Holly, can you talk about the next bullet point, section 6F?
Yes, you bet. And this is, I don't think we have Tamara Keefe, who is our NEPA lead, on with us today. But so we do not anticipate any impacts to the section 6F. So these are properties that have to do with land and water conservation funds and making sure that we are maintaining those and not impacting them. And so we have identified that we don't anticipate any impacts to those. We also review potential impacts to recreation facilities, parks, trails. And we have some minor impacts to a few parks, but no conversion of use. So that's what we're looking for there, is if we're taking and modifying the use of that. And so we're looking good, just minor impacts thus far identified there. And then, as you all have probably heard with the executive orders, there's been a lot of discussion around nomenclature and whether we refer to disproportionately impacted communities or environmental justice communities. And in the past, the analysis used to be referred to like the socioeconomic analysis. So we have the analysis actually from our end remains unchanged. But we refer to it as a community analysis, and there's a piece that goes to the federal, that goes for federal review aspect, and then there's a piece that goes just to the state. So it looks a little different from how it is delivered, but the analysis in the background remains the same, where we're looking for low income, minority, limited English proficiency populations, disproportionately impacted communities, where we're always wanting to make sure that our projects are benefiting the communities they're serving, and that we really put in the best project possible to help everybody in the corridor. So,
Alejandra?
Thank you. I'm wondering if, as part of those impacted communities, you're looking at young people who are not able to drive because of age, and safe routes to school.
we do, the demographics does include age as well, yes. Safe routes to school, we do not explicitly call out doing a safe routes to school analysis, but we do look at schools along the corridor and look to identify best paths to connect the BRT to the schools on the corridor.
And in regards to safety of, for example, as you know, or as I hope you know,
Yes.
a 15-year-old was killed at 52nd and Federal last week. And there's bus stops right there at 52nd, and the intersection is just harmful by design. And also there was a middle schooler that was hurt at 41st and Federal.
Yeah.
And so as we think about kids needing to use the BRT safely, how are we, focusing on that demographic specifically to ensure their maximum safety for them?
Yeah, most all of when we talked about the design evaluation that Brian just covered, it's very, very pedestrian safety focused, and really trying to look at how we can make it the safest it can be as an arterial facility through the community.
Dan, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes. And wait, am I muted? No.
No,
Okay.
you're
You're
good.
good.
All right. So I just wanted to, I was curious. For some reason, I thought I had heard that because of, since we're on the federal page, that there was maybe going to be potentially some impacts of federal on the federal funding. And I don't know whether, I mean, it sounds like Holly, you were referencing trying to um, avoid language that might trigger sort of that. But I mean, I guess that you're sort of in the bucket, if I'm understanding, where you have a contract and you're, might be subject to review at some point, but that you're funded for now, at least.
Well,
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Brian.
what we did was we've been working with the Federal Transit Administration through their capital investment grants program. And so in that program, there are a few different funding resources that are allocated to projects like this. One of them, the one that we have been pursuing, is called Small Starts. And so part of the way you get Small Starts funding is you submit a project application called a rating application, and it like goes through a pretty thorough evaluation that's predetermined by FTA and by federal law. And so we did all that last summer and we submitted it. And the way that funding recommendations are made is that the FTA will review the rating application, review all the data and the information you give them, and then they give you a rating and a funding recommendation that's made in a report to Congress each year. And so that report has not yet been made. So there's not been a funding recommendation for our project. And so um, what we've said is, this is a really important project for CDOT. It's in our 10-year plan. We're committed to moving it forward. So we don't know the outcome of the application that was made. We don't know what the recommendation is at this point. So we just wanted to be clear about our intent to move the project forward regardless of that outcome.
Okay.
Yeah, so with that, if CDOT uses federal funds, which CDOT is often a recipient of federal funds, hopefully. But if there's federal funds that come into the project, then NEPA analysis is required. So these are in response to how the federal government the executive orders are changing how we deliver NEPA, basically the National Environmental Policy Act. And those are like the language discussions at the bottom with environmental justice is really around that.
And honestly, we would have to do it anyway. So we're doing everything we need to do for the project. Nothing has really changed. We were just, with that communication, trying to be transparent about our commitment to making sure that the project moves forward. There's been a lot of news and a lot of discussion about what's going on with federal funding. And so we were just, I think, trying to get out ahead of things. And depending on how that recommendation lands, we may need to think about prioritizing, certain parts of the project to move forward first, but we're not there yet. We'll have discussions about that if we need to.
I appreciate your text, Mike. I was going to send you a thumbs up, but I don't know how to do it on Zoom, but thumbs up.
Leah, I see your hand raised.
I appreciate that information about the funding, and was gonna kind of ask about what you just touched on about like what is Plan B, and maybe you don't have that totally worked out, but I'm just curious what if there is a Plan B or another funding source or how that would move forward.
There isn't a Plan B completely worked out yet. I'll say that we do have So we actually do already have some federal dollars in the project, separate from the FTA funding. There's also a few different sources of state funds that are in the project, as well as local dollars. And so, I think with that diverse stack of funds, really what we'll try to do is maximize what's available to us to try to move as much of the project forward as possible initially, and then from there figure out, is there a phasing strategy or what that looks like. But again, we're not really there yet, so we'll certainly be sharing that information if we need to. And that stakeholder committee would be a important partner in reviewing that. Jill?
Just to put a little bit of a finer point on it, I mean, we are talking about what, $150 million. So, I definitely appreciate that CDOT is committed to this project and it's a priority for this project, but I think we need to be honest, right? If we don't get that $150 million, that is a significant change in the level of funding that's available and therefore the scope of what's possible. So I think some clarity from CDOT about that would be helpful. And the other question I had was, CDOT is in the process of updating its 10-year plan. And is that an opportunity to bring additional non-federal funding to this project?
It could be. Yeah, and I think we're not, as I mentioned, we're not quite at the point where we need to consider what a project without that funding looks like just yet. I mean, it's certainly something that we've been thinking about and working on as a backup. But we expect to have news of a funding recommendation in the next few months. So I think we'll have more information to share shortly, is probably the best way to put it.
Thanks, Ryan. I have empathy for you all dealing with this level of uncertainty. So please don't take this as like us attacking it. We're all just so thirsty for information.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
No,
and I think, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, it's not uncommon, just for this group's information, it's not uncommon for an applicant to apply and sometimes maybe not even be funded in a first round and go try again. And so when we think of everything that's happening with the federal activity right now, it may be that right now it's tumultuous and maybe, it's not this time, but you try again. And we did work CDOT worked hard to set themselves up to stay on schedule and push ahead with a potential second rating application. And as we've seen, this environment changes quickly depending on what's going on in DC. So,
yeah, I think just building on that point, like without letting things play out, we don't really know which direction, that piece of the funding will take. But I think the important thing to focus on is, for right now, we're on schedule. We have worked hard to advance this project, and we still intend to meet the timeline that we've been out in the world sharing. And should that funding look different, or as Holly mentioned, maybe it's further down the line, then we'll adjust. But we've been working on developing the project with the intent of implementing it. And that's the schedule. So yeah, we are nearing our 30% design milestone. It's a pretty big milestone. If you were to think about the project in thirds, it would be the completion of the first third of the project. So we expect that we will be there this summer. And as I mentioned, we'll be having public outreach and public meetings around that. We, as I mentioned, still intend on starting construction in 2027. So, yeah, I don't think I need to go into all of these line items, but just suffices to say that, we are on schedule. And as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, I think we have a lot of time today for questions and discussion. So happy to have more of that.
Ryan, I did drop a message that we got from Alejandra in the chat. She asked, can federal be reclassified into a safer road classification? Has CDOT reclassified other dangerous arterials to match their main street use?
Well, I think with arterials, our approach with arterials has been to make them safer, and the classification doesn't necessarily go with how dangerous the road is or isn't per se, but it's more about how it functions in like a connectivity way in the system. So I think the more important thing in my mind is just to make federal safer, period, if that makes sense. Yes.
Well, I just heard Holly said, well, it's an arterial. Like, well, we will have to continue to prioritize car throughput, right? So I'm wondering if it will give the project team more flexibility to make things the safest that it can be, not safer, but safest for everybody, including kids and older adults that I see every day when I'm walking on Federal or Sheridan. So I know I have read news about, some small towns where roads are reclassified to make them safer so that the project can apply, lower speed limits or some other treatments to that. And so is the project team thinking, proactively about these things? Or are we just stuck forever and ever with federal is for cars, federal is a highway, which I also hear from community members, excusing people dying and getting hurt on federal. So is this something that's a possibility, even just, for advocates like myself to focus on?
Well, so I would say that changing the classification won't necessarily make the roadway safer in and of itself. I think the thing that you mentioned with, lower speeds, generally being on lower classified streets. So I think that, there's room with an arterial to consider lower speeds, and that's something that we are doing with this project. We are looking at how to slow down vehicle speeds from where they are today. We know that speeding is a big problem on Federal Boulevard. It's probably, the worst street for speeding in the city. So, if anyone from Dottie is online and can back that up or prove me wrong, that would be helpful. But anyway, I mean, I think we are designing for slower speeds. I think you'll see that in the design when we share it later. So we agree on that point.
I guess what we don't agree on is that, dedicating a bus lane between 52nd and 20th would make the street safer than not dedicating a bus lane. Can we agree on that?
I wouldn't put it like that.
No? Okay. Well, I have seen lots of studies where it shows that when you do a road diet, whether by dedicating a bus lane or doing other things, it makes the street safer. But we are choosing not to do that because we are continuing to prioritize, car access and driver access over our safety concerns. So yeah, I realize that just by changing the classification, that won't do it. But if we change the classification and then on top of that, we, we summon the courage to actually make changes that make the street the safest it can be, then we will have, a better road for everybody, a
Yeah, I mean,
safest road.
I think we disagree on how that specific component of the project is being characterized. But I think we've discussed that quite a bit, and certainly, as I've mentioned before, we are open to evaluating that after the BRT opens, and moving it forward if it makes sense.
Do you have like a timeline where you think you might evaluate that?
Not off the top of my head because we're, several years out from construction, but, certainly I think, we'll be evaluating the project within the first year of it opening. So
Okay. And like
on multiple levels, right? So
Mhm.
like, it's not a matter of like one, we're going to evaluate one area of the project. Like we'll be monitoring it continuously.
Okay.
Jill.
I definitely appreciate your willingness to consider a dedicated lane in subsequent phases of the projects.
Mhm.
And I wonder if there's some way we can formalize that a bit and that the stakeholder committee could help you with that of like, what are the criteria that we would look at after it's been up and running for a year to evaluate how well is it achieving the intended outcomes and what
Mhm.
would be a trigger for considering actually going to a full dedicated lane and thinking about the range of things we could look at, like what are the impacts on noise, what are the impacts on travel time, what are the impacts
Mhm.
on safety, so that we have that documented and something that we can all agree on and refer to, and we don't end up at a year after it opens saying he said this and she said that, but we've got some kind of
Sure.
formal understanding of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a discussion we can have. And I appreciate that point. Yeah. Leah.
I have two questions that
Mhm.
Jill and Alejandra's points brought up another question for me.
Mhm.
Is the widening or adding a lane between Evans and Alameda pretty set in stone?
I would say so when we applied to the Federal Transit Administration, the ridership projections and travel time projections that we submitted uh, were based on the project including that component.
Uh,
And so if it did not include that component, it could change the evaluation of the project. And
okay.
one concern was that it would potentially drop it below there's a threshold in the evaluation process for
Hmm.
receiving a funding recommendation or not. And so we were pretty close on a few of the sub criteria.
Hmm.
And so we were concerned regarding, if you were to take that part out, it could potentially lead to a different outcome. We
Okay.
don't know for sure because we didn't do that, but
Okay. Yeah, because I also appreciate that it seems like two of the biggest controversies with this project are the widening and the
mhm,
dedicated lane between 20th and 50th. And like, I agree with Jill that, you know, I very much appreciate considering making it a dedicated lane between 20th and
mhm,
50th later. But once we widen the road, that's done. We can't undo that. And I still have a lot of concern about that. Um,
mhm.
and I guess maybe kind of in that vein, but I'm curious what is the relationship between the NEPA evaluation and access to federal funds? Like if we get a better environmental outcome, are more funds accessible? Is there any relationship there?
No, no, it's just, it's making sure that when CDOT uses federal funds, that they are following the regulations of the federal government we're not running over wetlands, taking federal
Okay.
funds and, running over wetlands, we should try to, first we try to avoid them, then we have mitigation. And then if you can't, you're avoiding and mitigating, is sort of the first thing. So it's just showing that you've gone through your due diligence, but not more funds, although other than you perhaps could not have access to the funds if you did not get through this process effectively.
I would also add, so there are like different levels of environmental review, and right now we're kind of in um the expedited level,
Mhm.
and with the goal of, trying to move this project forward and have it open for the public in the next few years. We're wanting to try to stay at that level. If it were to move into a different level, it could um, lengthen the amount of time that the project
Mhm.
takes, which, could affect your project budget. But I think more importantly, we don't want to, we're trying to not have BRT projects take a decade.
That's fair. Okay, then my last question is if we do need to go to Plan B and we don't get the
Mhm.
federal funding that's anticipated, will the widening be reconsidered? Sorry, the addition of a lane. I know it's the language is a little bit
Yeah.
funky there. Will
Yeah,
the addition of a lane be reconsidered?
I think it depends. I think it depends on, you know, if there is some FTA dollars, but not the full request, or, what. Yeah, it depends on how it all shakes out.
Yeah,
But
that
I think,
area has a lot of ridership, some of our best ridership projections,
Mhm.
and when we look
Mhm,
at the future, so we do want to just make sure that we're getting really good reliability
yeah,
through that area. One thing that I thought might be interesting for this to sort of talk about with this group, Ryan, and I want to be really cautious here, so please redirect me if I'm out of line. But I think one thing, amongst this group, we've talked a lot about that potential repurposing of a lane. And so we bring it up here because we know that this group brings it up. But I do think it's interesting to think about when we go out to the neighborhood organizations along the corridor and talk about that. It is not a well-received idea. And I think, this is hard to, when you tell somebody without perhaps all of the information, you're at a neighborhood meeting and you're hitting it in 15 minutes, you're maybe not getting the full picture that you all might have in that. But I do think that's also a balancing act in the recommendations, that there's a huge group of people that we are trying to serve and impacting their community. And while there are some people that are very pro this, there are very many people that are as adamantly against that. And so as you're trying to move the project forward, balancing the various, inputs, that you're getting from people is also a piece of the equation. I don't know. I mean, Ryan, does that feel like a fair characterization?
yeah, I think so. I mean, we've been working hard to talk to as many people about this project as possible, and to have a really varied community engagement approach. So, we've been doing the registered neighborhood meetings. But also been, doing community events. Um, we've had some public meetings. We'll have more. Uh, we've recently started doing Spanish language radio. So we've been doing spots on Spanish language radio, and have Project Navigator program. So kind of a community connectors is what it's often referred to as well. So more like person to person engagement, less of like me or someone from the team showing up and talking to people, and more having people talk with themselves and amongst themselves about the project. So, but I think, we still are open to suggestions. If you have any places you think we need to be and be talking to people, I think that's really important for us to hear. Alejandra?
things. And please, if there's anybody else from the community who wants to speak and I'm taking too much time, please let me know.
You're not.
I think it would be fair to say I was at the first pop-up event at the Woodbury Library when I met you for the first time, Ryan. And there was never a question whether that was a possibility. It was always presented as, we're not going to do that. We're not going to repurpose a lane. So don't worry about it. So immediately the project team came out with an approach of appeasing the people who be worried about losing a car lane, right? So if we would have gone and approached this project and this design phase with an open mind, asking people, telling people, showing people what it is possible in alignment with the project goals and benefits that CDOT stated on their own website, then these conversations with community members and with RNOs, which I belong to one, and I'm going to tell you most of them are supportive of the status quo, which we know is harmful for all of us. So as the project team decided to sort of switch their strategy to engage with RNOs last year, then obviously you were going to hear from people that, yes, oh, I'm so glad that you are not repurposing a lane of car traffic because, oh my God, I'm going to be stuck in traffic for 5 more minutes. So I think we need to be honest with ourselves as to what, from the beginning, was the goal, was to appease people who might be opposed by coming out with a message that was like, don't worry, we're not going to be doing that. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't, I appreciate your comment, Alejandra. So that wasn't our goal when we started the project. I think and maybe we haven't said this as often as we maybe could have, but when we did start the design phase of this project, we were building off of previous work that had been done. And so, in the interest of not trying to start from the beginning, we did build on planning work that had already been completed. So, that's where that came from, and that's what we've advanced. But I would also add, thought about how can we address the concern that the bus and riders on the bus are going to be stuck in traffic. And so that's why we've taken the approach of adding bypass lanes and queue jumps where we think they'll work really well and be very effective. So
why? And so I'm talking about Leah's concerns in her community about widening the road. Was that necessary? Couldn't you just repurpose a lane there where it's already, so wide and cars take up an unfair share of space? Where is sort of the ability of our state transportation officials to be flexible and think ahead? I mean, we're like planning for 5 years ago, whenever the federal study alternatives was created, instead of thinking forward in what we want our communities to look like. Is there no flexibility there?
Well, I would argue that there is flexibility. So, the design south of Alameda includes adding a bus lane and repurposing an existing travel lane to a bus lane. So today there are 5 lanes that are dedicated for driving or, buses. Anyone who can use those lanes. When we finish the project, there will be 4 lanes for driving or trucks, and there will be 2 bus lanes, and like we do recognize like widening the street is not great, but today the existing condition is not great either. The lanes are, well, the roadway is in really poor condition and needs to be rebuilt. The outside lanes are not conducive to rapid transit. I mean, they're not really even conducive to a local bus. Like the bus goes less than 10 miles an hour in that stretch of the corridor. So no matter what, something has to change there. And we think that this is the right approach for getting bus rapid transit on Federal. And we can, and we can disagree about it. But I mean, that's where we're coming from. Joe.
Just to respond a little more directly to Holly's observation that those of us in the stakeholder committee love dedicated lanes, and the neighborhood folks that you're talking to outside of this committee hate dedicated lanes.
Yeah, I would, yeah, I don't want to go too far with it, but yeah. It's a wide spectrum, a big spectrum.
There's a wide spectrum.
Yeah.
I think, as I put this in the chat, I think ultimately what's important is to focus on the outcomes that we all want to achieve. And I think that you will find there is a lot of agreement on the outcomes that we want to achieve, that we all want faster, more reliable transit. We all want Federal Boulevard to be a safer street. We'd all love it to be more quiet and more green and blah, blah, blah. And to a certain extent, we're trusting you to come up with the right design tools to achieve those outcomes. And the stakeholder has a certain opinion on, what those right tools are. And the neighborhood folks who maybe are less deeply involved in the conversation have a certain opinion.
Yes.
But to me, this all points back to, if we can agree on what the outcomes are, can CDOT commit to immediately evaluating, after the BRT has been operating for a year? Maybe you guys are right. Maybe all we need is traffic signal priority and queue jump lanes, and the transit frequency and reliability and speed will be amazing. And that's what matters, right? And so just to reiterate my request of, like, can we document that and then have a plan for, we're going to evaluate how well we did in achieving those outcomes. And if we could be doing better, going back and reconsidering some of these issues that we're disagreeing about right now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach. I think like I said, we can have that discussion around that for sure. Yes, and safety would be included in that, Alejandra. Anyone else today? We have till 1:30.
Okay, well, if nobody wants to jump in, I'd like to talk about, I live right in the middle of sort of the 20th, between 20th and 52nd. Really, it's not 50th anymore, as far as I know. Having 4 lanes of general purpose traffic makes it such an unpleasant and unsafe experience for a lot of us. And so if that's not going to change very drastically, right? How many deaths and serious injuries does CDOT, is CDOT happy with, or is CDOT okay with by not, implementing proven solutions to make it safer? How many will that be in a year? Just so that I can keep track while I'm following the news.
Yeah, thank you for your comment.
I'm asking a question. I would like to know a number. Like, is CDOT okay with a certain number of people who get killed or are seriously injured between 20th and 52nd?
I mean, I feel like my response to that question, Alejandra. I think this is more of a rhetorical question.
Yes.
I know. I mean, I hope you as a person would say 0, but I'm asking as a representative of CDOT. And when you guys are look at numbers and things like that, what makes it okay to not implement even further safety improvements?
So as both a person and a representative of CDOT, the answer is 0. Any other questions?
You have one more. Sorry, I've been
Okay.
meaning to ask this and have
Yeah.
kept forgetting. What has the conversation and outreach been like with the property owners who would be affected by the right-of-way acquisition? What's that been like?
Well, we haven't really gotten into that yet because we haven't determined what amount of right-of-way acquisition or easements would be needed at this point. That's still a little bit in flux, and so what we're trying to avoid is when we do need to have those discussions that we don't have to backtrack, or we don't want to approach property owners and say one thing and then be like, oh no, never mind, it's actually this. So
Mhm.
we're just trying to get that as close to finalized as possible before we start having discussions about what that's going to look like.
Okay. Also, what will access look like for businesses on Federal once it's implemented, BRT is implemented?
Yeah, so I would say generally speaking, so the bus lanes do allow drivers to turn right into and out of driveways. The driveways themselves, we are taking kind of a property by property approach to access management. So thinking about like, if there's an excessive number of driveways, can we clean that up? If there's really wide lawn driveways, can we make those more narrow? So that'll be a discussion I think that we'll obviously need to have very closely with property owners as well. But we are really trying to make it so that the sidewalk or pathway of pedestrians isn't impacted by a ton of driveways as much
Okay.
as we can.
I would be really interested in like the outcomes or like what's
Mhm.
going on in those discussions. Is there like, will we still be meeting as a stakeholder committee when those conversations start to happen? How long will this meeting be going on? This group?
I intend, or I believe that the stakeholder committee will extend into the next phase of the project. So long as you're all still interested in participating.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I definitely would be interested in hearing about some of those conversations when it gets to that point. Thank you.
I thought I saw Anissa's hand raised. Okay.
Oh, yes, she says she's going to put it in chat. Did you see that?
Yes. Alejandro, is your hand raised again, or was that from the last time?
Yeah, in thinking about driveways, rollways, and sidewalks. On the sidewalks that CDOT is going to be constructing along some part of the corridor, would you consider having continuous sidewalks, rollways, so that wheelchair users don't have to go in and up and up and down, and it also kind of slows down drivers as they enter the driveway? I don't know how to explain it, but
So
instead of
so the sidewalk is like level, it doesn't like dip into the driveway.
correct, and then there's just like a little lip for the trucks and cars and SUVs to go up. So it prioritizes the pedestrian rather than the driver.
Yeah, I think that's the intent. Adam, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, that is the intent, to make the, I guess, pedestrian experience smooth and lower the design speed of the turns into driveways. The one caveat is that it does take a little bit more space to do that. So it would be a slightly larger, more expensive undertaking, bigger right-of-way takes, but I think it's something worth designing and constructing. Because it's important to prioritize transit and transit users on this project, and it's important that the walk to the bus stop is smooth and safe. So yeah, thank you for bringing up that detail. It's clear out there on Federal Boulevard that a lot of the driveway cuts make it harder to to access the bus station or the existing bus stops.
Thank you,
And a lot of
Adam.
a lot of the sidewalks are also just in really poor shape as well. So we'll be addressing those.
Thanks.
Baby bag.
Thank you.
Oh, so okay. Anissa's question is, are funds going to be available for businesses during construction to offset any lost business that might have occurred because of the construction, and where or will those be coming from elsewhere? So we are we're starting to coordinate with Denver's Department of Economic Development and Opportunity on that piece, and thinking about construction impacts early. And certainly from a project management standpoint, you know, we'll be thinking about how to set up traffic control during construction, and you know, what part of construction occurs in order to try to be as or lessen the disruption to businesses as much as possible. But I think, you know, there's also that piece where we're thinking about business impacts, and so we don't have that all worked out yet, but we have started those discussions.
Because
Thank you.
you're
Any other questions? Does see that have some? I don't, Jill, I don't know if we do have a specific fund for businesses impacted by construction. I haven't heard of one. I know, Adam, you've worked on some construction projects. Are you familiar with anything like that?
I am not familiar with an offering from CDOT on that.
Yeah, I feel like Denver has something in place, right? I don't know if
Mm.
Mai's out there, but I'm not sure from CDOT.
But it is a topic of coordination and discussion between Denver and CDOT. So there'll more to come on that. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for your time today. And if you have any questions that you think of after the meeting or any follow-ups, please, you know, feel free to reach out. You know how to reach me. You could also email the project email as well. But certainly if you email me, I'll respond to you directly. And I guess have a good rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, thanks, Hal.